This is Paul Poirier at the American Banjo Museum, and we're doing our best to preserve, present, and promote the banjo in all of its styles. But we can't do it without you. We need your support, so I hope you'll join me in contributing to your American Banjo Museum. And thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Johnny Baier. I'm the Executive Director of the American Banjo Museum in Oklahoma City. We are delighted to welcome you to another version of American Banjo Museum Rewind. Over the years, we have archived a mass of wonderful video content that we really think bears repeating. So we're going to dig into the archives today and take you back to a very special time here at the museum. Back in 2016, we started working on a new exhibit called Roy Clark, America's Super Picker. And that was the first time we had a chance to get together with Roy and spend some time getting to know him and his career. As we put the exhibit together with the help of the Jim Halsey Company, we really had a lot of fun getting the nitty-gritty on Roy Clark's career. Back in early 2017, I had a chance to sit down with Roy and visit with him about his amazing life and career. Part of today's program is going to be that interview. Another part of today's program will be the 2017 induction ceremony where Roy Clark was put into the American Banjo Museum Hall of Fame. Mr. Halsey and Mr. Clark shared so many wonderful memories and photos. For us to put that program together, it just can't stay locked up any longer. So we're going to start our program today with a little bit of Roy Clark being inducted into our Hall of Fame. We will take you on to that wonderful interview where Roy Clark shares so many insights about his life and career. And then we're going to do a little piece from Discover, Oklahoma, when Roy actually visited the museum for the opening of the Roy Clark America's Super Picker event. This was one of the highlights of all the years we've been open, to have Roy Clark come in here and tell everyone that he felt the love of the banjo when he walked in the door. Rest in peace, Roy Clark. We miss you, we miss your music, but we relish the joy that you brought to so many lives through your super picking. Let's visit with Roy Clark. Taking the best from an impoverished childhood and developing an innate talent into international superstardom, the life and career of the man known as America's Super Picker, Roy Clark, can only be described as extraordinary. Born with music in his heart in 1933 in Meherrin, Virginia, Roy Linwood Clark is the son of two amateur musicians. Roy's interest in music surfaced at the age of 11 when he began playing around with his father's tenor banjo. Practicing his instrument so much that his fingers bled, Roy won 2 national banjo championships and at the expense of his schoolwork was simultaneously pursuing both his music as well as a career in baseball and boxing. After appearing on local radio and television, however, when an invitation to do a guest performance on the Grand Ole Opry came at the age of 17, Roy Clark dedicated himself solely to his music. After spending a year in Nashville working with Grand Ole Opry stars such as Grandpa Jones, Ernest Tubb, and Red Foley, in 1951, Roy Clark returned to the Washington, D.C. area where he could play not only country, but pop, jazz, and rock and roll as well. Roy joined Jimmy Dean's band in 1954, appearing as a regular on Dean's Town and Country Time television program. After his habitual tardiness caused Dean to fire him, at the age of 27 and out of work, it was Wanda Jackson's offer for him to come to Las Vegas that turned out to be a turning point in Roy Clark's career. Fighting a chronic lack of self-confidence, the following years saw Roy work diligently as he developed his unique, standalone talent as a multi-instrumentalist, singer, and comic. His path to stardom nearly complete, in 1962, Roy signed with Capitol Records and released his first solo instrumental album, The Lightning Fingers of Roy Clark. The early 1960s were pivotal in the career of Roy Clark. After appearing on The Tonight Show and seeing his instrumental recordings enjoying significant airplay, Capitol executives quickly capitalized on Roy's ability as a vocalist, releasing his first hit vocal recording, The Tips of My Fingers, in 1962. Clark's rural sense of humor was equally effective when he played dual roles on numerous episodes of the Beverly Hillbillies. With unquestionable momentum, by the late 1960s, Roy Clark's career was on the verge of a full-blown explosion.
When did you leave Bug Tussle, Roy?
Early Monday morning, Granny.
That's a good time of day. And now that we've passed it, let's hear some music.
In September of 1968, CBS producers approached Roy with the idea for a show that was a country version of NBC's hit Laugh-In. Saying yes to the concept, Clark was stunned when his manager called and said, "They're getting ready to do that show." Clark replied, "What show?"
Welcome to Hee Haw, starring Buck Owens and Roy Clark.
The show he'd forgotten he agreed to do, Hee Haw, went on the air in June of 1969.
I'm Buck. I'm Roy. Let's go.
Universally panned by critics, Hee Haw was an instant sensation among the public, making Roy Clark the face of the banjo for a generation. Despite its high ratings, CBS canceled Hee Haw in 1971. Moving into syndication without missing a beat, Hee Haw went on for another 20 years, making it the longest-running weekly syndicated series in history.
Yesterday, when I was young, so many happy songs were waiting to be sung.
With Hee Haw firmly establishing him as an American entertainment icon, in the 1970s and 80s, Roy Clark came to symbolize country music to a new generation. He toured constantly, often selling out the showrooms of major venues in Las Vegas while upholding his country roots as a member of the Grand Ole Opry. In addition to Hee Haw, Roy was a regular on numerous talk, sitcom, and variety television shows, including becoming a regular guest host for Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show.
Rocky Top, Tennessee.
What a wonderful world.
An unlikely international emissary of peace and goodwill, in 1976, Roy Clark became just that as the first country music artist to perform in the Soviet Union. After hosting a delegation of Soviets in Las Vegas, Clark was invited to tour their country, ultimately playing 18 concerts to sold-out audiences. Following the tour, the State Department praised Clark for opening diplomatic doors which had been closed for decades. When he returned to Russia in 1988 by invitation of Premier Gorbachev, Roy Clark was hailed as a hero. Although he's a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame and the recipient of every award and honor his industry can bestow, Roy Clark's decade-defying success can be summed up in one word: sincerity. A sincere smile, a sincere wit, and a sincere love of music as well as his audience. But there is more. His performances touch listeners with a personal connection that comes from within and extends far beyond music and laughter. Simply put, Roy Clark is a unique and truly once-in-a-world performer.
Here today in Tulsa, Oklahoma, thanking Roy Clark for sharing with us some of what could only be described as an amazing life and career. Thanks for spending time to visit with us, Roy.
Wouldn't have missed it for the world. Thank you.
You're very welcome. We want to start talking about your musical life at the very beginning. Can you remember the first exposure to music when you were a little kid?
Well, the first exposure to music, well, I was an infant. I'd like to say we were in a crib. I was in a crib, but we didn't have a crib. Couldn't afford one. My dad was playing square dance music back then, so I would hear him tuning up for a weekend of playing square dances. So I was listening to that when I was, like I say, in a crib if we could afford it. And then as I grew older, I would hear notes that were ringing in the air, and started hearing it put into music. So the more I heard, I guess the more I wanted to hear.
Do you remember how music affected you when you actually saw it being made?
It really got me to where I would hear music, but always when I was doing something else. But music was always there. It seemed like that when I got through playing all my sports that I was involved in, there was always music. And I found myself being drawn more to the music and less for the sports. It seemed like I could do music easier than I could the sports.
But you were a heck of an athlete, correct?
To this day, I would be playing baseball with a major league team somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's how much I really loved sports. And it upset me for a while because when I was doing sports, I was keeping myself in pretty good shape physically.
Mm-hmm.
I started playing music, I just sit back, and I started getting out of shape and not being able to do what I had done most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I started having bad thoughts about music. So I wised up. It didn't take me long to say, you better be nice to your banjo and your instruments because that's the only thing you really got going.
Can you describe the sensation you felt when your neighbor handed a guitar and you played it for the first time?
I see things in pictures, and I can see me sitting on the stoop. Dad had a tenor banjo. I think it only had 2 strings on it. And I'd be out on the front porch and picking on it a little bit. And this neighbor came over and said he heard me playing and wondered if I'd ever played a guitar. I said, no, in fact, I've never even touched one. This is it for me. So he went back to his house and came back and had a 6-string arch top, $5 out of a Sears and Roebuck catalog. When he handed me that guitar, and I raked my fingers over the strings and had all those choices, 6 strings, and soft, there was a switch went off in my head and said, I've got to learn to play this. And I could cause it to sound any way I wanted. And I did, and I made up little things and pretended I was on the radio. It seemed like the more I was looking for music, the more of it I found. At first, I thought only my uncles and my dad played music. Then we got a little radio, and I heard a country music show, and I heard all these instruments that I could now identify. It just slowly started taking over about all I thought about when I wasn't actually playing it.
it wasn't a center of country music, but you grew up in Washington, D.C. area. Did that area that you grew up in have any effect on your influences and your inspiration for music?
Exactly, because I've often looked back on it and thought, if I had stayed down in the rural part of Virginia where I was born, the way that life was slow, easy, very little entertainment, if I had stayed in Virginia, I would more or less just learned about what they were playing there. I get to Washington, and there's people there from all over. And then my dad went to work for the federal government, and he started playing square dances in Washington. I got to thinking that maybe I could do that and be part of. There were more teachers there than there were back in my hometown. So I've often thought that is about as good as education that I could have ever afforded. I didn't take advantage of all of them that were available, but I think I run out of teachers after a while because they said, we used to watch you when you came into where we were playing, and we'd look at one another and say, okay, boys, here he is. He's going to bug you all night long. So if he asks how you made that chord, you might as well go ahead and teach him, because he's not going to go away.
Did getting paid to perform music when you were still a teenager have any positive or negative effect on your love of music?
Not really, because I was so consumed with music, I didn't think about, am I going to get paid for this? I didn't have to make a living because I was still at home with my dad and my mother, so it was just the music for me. And having a built-in teacher like my dad, if I had a problem, all I had to do was wait till he got home from work. I'd say, how does this go? And my dad would show me, so I was off and running. My life was really etched in stone that that's where I will be sooner or later.
When did the banjo come into your musical learning curve?
I had been picking around on a tenor banjo. I found out later that I didn't have a teacher, but I wanted to learn how to play a plectrum. I got a chance to see Eddie Peabody on stage at the Capitol Theater in Washington, D.C. He was only about 4 feet tall, and that banjo looked like it was taller than him as he drug it out by the neck and then sit out on the stool and just tore it up. That was the one that probably got me more involved in trying to learn what else was there. I'm beginning to realize now that I haven't even scratched the surface. There are some things I've got to learn how to play.
You're known as a multi-instrumentalist. Could you outline the path you took? You started with the guitar, then the banjo. When did the fiddle and mandolin and all those other instruments come into play?
I've always been intrigued by sound. I never once thought if I learned different instruments, I'll have a chance to maybe make more money. I never felt that way. The only reason I learned how a little bit of piano and trumpet and the rest of them is what I was totally caught up with what make that instrument do all the different things. So that was the reason that I found one thing led to another. My dad told me years and years ago when I was just starting, don't shut your heart off, don't shut your ear off until you hear the music that reaches your heart. That's been a blessing to me forever, that anything that's strange, I just say, I think I really like that. I'm going to find out. And I'd go to a pawn shop. I'd swap the trumpet off for a mandolin. As soon as I learned a little bit on it, then I'd switch it over to something else.
When you were learning one instrument, did you ever felt that another instrument suffered, or did you feel that you were enhancing another instrument by learning a different instrument?
I've never thought of it that way, but I believe that the different sounds on different instruments did make me feel like there was something else. So if I was doing a banjo, I'd get to a point where all of a sudden I said, this will sound better on a Hawaiian guitar. So I'd get me a kitchen knife, raise the strings up on that acoustic guitar, and learn how to play Hawaiian. Everything like that led to the other. So instead of one taking over most of my time, I would just use that time as growing another sound that I'm beginning to really love.
Do you have any one favorite instrument?
I think it would have to be a guitar. I can do more things with it. Seems like the more you learn, the more there is to learn. I was thinking that by the time that I get accepted to make phonograph records or television shows, that they will have used all the notes up, all the variations. I said, how many are there? There's not that many, and they've already been repeated.
You once said during your career you learned to do comedy as a self-defense mechanism. Tell us about that. What did you mean by that?
It started back in grade school because I was the class clown. And when I did something that made the rest of the class laugh, all except the teacher, I found out that I could do that, and when I made them laugh, that it felt good. I found out by, making jokes and whatever it took to make them laugh in the classroom, I could do that in life. So when I got to playing out where there were other musicians, good ones, I got to thinking, I've heard other musicians that know and can do a lot more than me. The people out there that are buying tickets to come in to see me play, boy, I don't know if I can fulfill that burden or what, but I would just look at someone in the audience and they'd be looking at me and I'd be thinking, are they going to come up after the show and say, well, you're not bad, but you're not all that good. I applied for a card from Sears and Roebuck, and I have to fill out my name, address, and what do you do for a living? Boy, that would bother me in the worst. I'd say, well, I'm a musician. You're what? I'm a musician. You're a musician? Yes, ma'am. And she would say, well, are you pretty good? I said, well, I make a living at it. It's embarrassing to think that they would give me credit when I was no better than I was trying to get through this thing.
As your recording career took off, you started to bounce between the persona of being an instrumentalist and a vocalist. Are you happy with the balance you achieved so far?
Yes, I was happy with it, but I didn't feel any pressure from doing one or the other. Ken Nelson, who was the A&R director, came up and said, how would you like to record for Capitol? I said, I would love it. One of the top labels in the country. He talked a little more and he said, I'm going to have to sign you as an instrumentalist because we already have several singers that we're trying to find good material for. He said, so I go in and tell them I've signed another vocalist. It may cost me my job. So what we'll do is we'll sign you as an instrumentalist and we'll work on getting you a vocal contract. He said, we'll just do it a step at a time. And so that's the way that worked out. No, just being on the label and getting attention from the top disc jockeys that were buying and playing your records. No, I was in there with the big boys. So I don't care if I come in as a yodeler.
When did becoming a vocalist become part of Roy Clark?
I found that you could do one or two things. You could come out and play an instrumental tune, and then you start thinking about the very popular songs of the day that I really loved to sing. So I just incorporated that. Plus, I loved lyrics to songs. Just couldn't wait to sing them. And that went over very good. And it boosted my career that I could do all these different things and people put up with it. Said, this kid is not all that bad. Jimmy Dean, who was a big influence on my life, I had been a band member of his, the Texas Wildcats, back in D.C., Washington. He fired me for being late. When Jimmy said be there at 8 o'clock, he didn't mean 8:05. He meant 8 o'clock. And I thought 8-10 was close enough. We never had a bad word. Just he was going somewhere and I was taking my time. I was in Safford, Arizona one night, and I got a phone call from Jimmy Dean. He said, "Where have you been? I've been trying to get a hold of you. I'm hosting the Tonight Show. I wanted to have you on. Tomorrow is my last day. That's a Friday. And here you're in Arizona on a Thursday." And so the two of us said, "Well, see if we can work it out." And so I got a ride to Tucson. I got a flight from Tucson to Phoenix, to Chicago, to New York, to NBC. That's the first time I'd seen Jimmy. He said, "Well, what do they have you down for?" I said, "Well, they talked about me doing two songs and maybe a duet with you." And he said, "Well, we'll try the 2 songs." And he said, "If that don't get them, we'll do 2 more. And if that don't cut it, we'll do 2 more." He said, "When you leave here tonight, you're going to be tall hog at the trough. Back to Chicago, back to Phoenix, back to Tucson. And then that night, I'm back at this hotel, the Buena Vista, in Safford, Arizona." And I said, looked at all the traffic backed up. The closer we got, found out these were people that had seen me the night before in New York on the Tonight Show. They're all coming now to Tucson to see this guy that was on with Jimmy Dean the night before. Probably one single appearance that was the biggest boost I had.
You love to entertain people, don't you?
Yes, I do, because it's been so much a part of me. And if they don't like this, let's try that. So I listen to an audience. Each one we do is different. Not long ago, I had a little guy come up. He said, "What are you doing here in this town?" He said, "I thought you'd be in New York. I've often thought I don't want to be in one place, wishing I was somewhere else. Tonight is the most important night of my life. The next time we go to New York City, that'll be the most important."
Knowing your Hee Haw fans have certain expectations, go into a little bit about how you balance between comedy and music and live performance.
I try to fit in with whatever situation that's needed. I don't come out on stage and say, "Here's a song that you're going to like," because it's the only one I know. I don't do that. I said, "I'll do this one. If you don't like it, let's see if I can do something else you like." And that philosophy is always saved me for doing something that will appeal to as many people as I can. It's a funny thing about where I'm at now opposed to how I started and what the direction I was going for a long time before Hee Haw. The way that Hee Haw started, I was a guest on the Jonathan Winters show, and the producers came up and introduced themselves and said that they had this idea for a musical version, country music, not unlike Laugh-In. And you say yes to everything in this business. And I said, "Well, of course I would be interested." So they said, "We'll be in touch." Well, that was like in September. That January, my manager called and said, "They're ready to do that show." I said, "They're ready to do what show?" He said, "Well, they're calling it Hee Haw." It's probably a working title. When it comes time to put it together, they'll come up with a better name. And looking back on it, what better name could they have possibly come up with? Hee Haw is just a combination of all the things I've done all my life.
Do you have a singular favorite or bittersweet memory from Hee Haw?
Bittersweet, yes. We're losing so many of the original cast members. The love of Hee Haw there, I can watch it on reruns now, and everyone on that show is a nice, positive memory. We never had a major argument on that show. We went in twice a year, in June and October, so we weren't around each other long enough, to get on each other's nerves. Then we went out and did our concerts and came back in October and did the second half. So when I look at a cast picture, it's nothing but good. Love. And that's the name of the game.
There were so many big stars outside of country music that wanted to be on Hee Haw. Did you ever find yourself starstruck out in the cornfield with one of those guys or gals?
Oh, yeah. Most of them I knew from different concerts through the years because I played anything that was on major television. Sooner or later, I would be a guest. And then when Hee Haw came along, they all wanted to do Hee Haw because it was the only outlet they had for national exposure. And so they all wanted to do it. From Sammy Davis Jr. to Vic Damone. I'd meet them on the road and they'd say, "When you going to have me on your show?" I said, "Well, I'll turn your name in and see what we can do." They wanted to be part of it. And they wanted not just to sing their latest record, they wanted to be wearing bib overalls and stuff. And if you could see Sammy Davis Jr. with all his gold medallions hanging around his neck, and he came out and Sam Lavello, the producer, said, "When you're on Hee Haw, we have a rule that you have to wear bib overalls." And Sammy said, "Well, this is what I always wear." And Sam said, "Go back and be fitted." So he went back to wardrobe and came out. He had on a bib overhaul and about 4 pounds of gold medallions on the outside of that bib overhaul. He was going to get his way too.
From being a guest on every major television show, you ended up behind the desk at The Tonight Show. Tell us a little bit about that experience for you.
It was because of being on The Tonight Show as a guest on with Johnny that I got to know Fred DeCordova, the producer. Then Johnny was doing these guest host things. They said, "Well, let's get Roy Clark, the guy, he did pretty good last time he's here." They put me on as a guest, and that went over good. And then they put me on like twice a week. And then they put me on for a week as a host. And I found out right off, that's a hot seat when you sit down, that Carson has made it look so easy.
Do you remember your first guest?
You've been looking at something, taking notes, because yes, Bob Hope. Now what am I going to ask Bob Hope that he has not always been already been asked? But fortunately, he looked at me and he saw I was a little antsy. And he broke in, he says, "You know, your face is like an open fireplace. We know what you're going to say because your fireplace is wide open. Wow. When you get ready to say something, to do something, we can tell you're going to do it. You're taking control."
The entertainment business is known for stumbling blocks. Do you remember your biggest setback and what you learned from it?
There was a television series starting up that originally had been done as a stage play with Andy Griffith called No Time for Sergeants. Well, there was a lead for the television show that they were going to do. So I went to New York and read for Sam Goldwyn. He said, "I think you may be just right for this." So I had to go to California, and I had to work with and read for Jack Webb. And they had Dragnet and all that. Had to sit in his outer office for 2 or 3 hours. And he walked in, they said, "Mr. Webb, we'll see you now." Took me into his office, he looked up and said, "Too fat," and excused us. I went from wherever I was to New York and read for Sam Goldwyn, to California for Jack Webb, and I get too fat? I don't think I want to do this show anyway. But that was my introduction to the way that show business can be.
You've amassed a large collection of guitars and banjos and such. Do you have any favorites for particular reasons out of all the instruments you've got?
Only emotional differences. I've got the first guitar that I touched, the first guitar that I ordered my dad ordered from Sears and Roebuck. So there's so many absolute favorites, but then I'll look at another one and say, well, I can't leave that out. Because I've been so fortunate that I've had major instrument manufacturers that will let you in the back door, so to speak, and said, here, don't tell anybody where you got it. My first guitar, it's a wonder. The action was so high, it drew blood when I tried to learn, because I wouldn't lay it down. I just put it in ice water, and that would numb the fingers to where I couldn't wait.
Wow.
It has not been any other one thing that has consumed my life like music. From a Russian balalaika to a banjo by Earl Scruggs. It's the same difference.
During your Evening with Roy Clark shows that you've been doing recently, you ask your audience for questions. Have you ever had a question come up you didn't expect or was hard to answer for you?
Not really that I didn't expect. And there's been some that make me smile, the fact that they remember that. First of all, when we started An Evening with Roy Clark, I'm thinking, what have I done or said that makes it interesting enough for anyone to come out and sit and talk and ask me questions? I ain't that brilliant. But the first couple of shows that we did, they wiped all the fears away. I mean, it's such a warm feeling. They'll bring up some things that I did, but I don't remember. It was no big deal. And now here they are making a night of talk back and forth.
At a really young age, you recognized the special connection that Elvis Presley and Hank Williams had with their audience.
We were in Baltimore, Maryland, doing a country music show. Hank Williams was the big star. Well, we opened the show with a square dance. When Hank went on, I'd go out around to the back in this beautiful ornate theater. Jerry Rivers, who was Hank's fiddle player, he and I would go up the steps behind stage, and I turned around one day and Hank Williams is standing just about as far as that little statuette. And I'm thinking, my Lord, Hank Williams. And Hank, I felt him stand up and said, well, you guys don't care if all Hank's here or not. And he got up and left. And I said, no, I wanted to say, we care. Come back and sit down, we care. Jerry said, don't worry about it. Said if we'd have said something, he'd have said he didn't come up here to talk. Now he comes up here to talk and you don't want to. With Elvis, the first time we met is when he got out of the service. I had played behind him in Washington, D.C., when he was doing a regular concert. So we had made eye contact. And when he come out of the service, he went from Germany or wherever to New York to Washington, D.C., where he spent the night on a train. He had a private car. And Marvin Carroll said, let's go down there and see if we can say hello. I said, we can't, there's going to be security everywhere. He said, well, tell them who we are. So we went down. Some security was there. And the one of them said, well, Elvis is resting. And Marvin said, well, tell him that we played with him when he was here. And Elvis came down and spoke and acted like he did remember. So that was my connection with Elvis until I spent a couple of days with him in Las Vegas when he was at the Hilton. So he introduced me in the audience that night, which made me feel good. But they also said he was a big fan of Hee Haw. He thought that was funny.
Having enjoyed success in live performance, in television, and recording, which of those mediums do you think you connect with an audience the best?
The one with the largest audiences that I feel very comfortable with is television. In the early days of television was incredibly difficult. The lights and stuff that was on the stands. You tune a guitar or an instrument and walk out under the lights, you were immediately out of tune. You could feel the wood bending. And the television, I always looked at the camera as if it was a person. I didn't see mechanical things that made great pictures and stuff. With me, it was like I'm smiling, that camera's smiling back too. So I felt very warm. Any communication I had, I addressed to a television set. So now it was my friend, it was my buddy.
Knowing what you know now, could you go back and give young Roy Clark one bit of career advice?
The best I could do is do like my daddy did to me. He would tell me there is no second show. Everything you do is number one. It'll never be repeated. It'll make a great memory. And you can't bother it because it's a memory. But that's going to be on your side from day one. Enjoy it. If you're not having a good time, you're doing something that ain't right. Don't worry about how much you can get paid. You'll get enough. Have fun. Make your music. If I had put into it the effort and the dedication that my daddy did, I'd really been a big star years ago. My daddy said there's more to it, let's go find it.
If you could give young up-and-comers a bit of career advice based on what's going on in the business today, what would that be?
I've always been, I think, looking at what could I add to what's going on in this day and age. I don't try to copy, but if I hear what the young people are doing, it may spike something inside of me that said, I don't have to do that exactly, but I can use that feel and what they're doing and incorporate it into what I feel. And I would tell any young person that is out there, as long as it feels good, do it. If it don't feel comfortable, don't do it.
You had a hit song, If I Had to Do It All Over Again, which was about a loving relationship of a couple.
Right.
But if you had to live your life all over again, would you change anything?
I don't think really that I would change anything, because you look back on it and say, well, I could change that, I could have done that different. But on the other hand, if you did that different, means that you would not be doing anything the way you did it the first time. So if you replace it with something, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be better. That's why if you're doing it live, you better do it right the first time, because that's the only time you're going to get.
Roy Clark, thank you for telling us about your life. We are so honored to have you as a musical friend. Thank you.
Bless your heart. Thank you.
Hey, Lucas here at the American Banjo Museum in Bricktown, Oklahoma City, among over 400 beautiful banjos on display. But there's a brand new exhibit you gotta check out. America's Super Picker, Roy Clark. Hi, I'm Lucas here at the American Banjo Museum with legend Roy Clark.
Legend.
Yes. Congratulations on being inducted and having this great display at the American Banjo Museum.
But it blows my mind.
Wow.
It's beautiful.
I mean, you talk about the first instrument you ever heard.
Well, the first musical sounds was a banjo. My dad played tenor banjo, so that was hearing him when I was just in a crib. I was, I guess, attracted to wonder where that sound came from, and could I make it happen?
You have been on everything from The Tonight Show to the Beverly Hillbillies to the Muppets to the Odd Couple and of course Hee Haw. What was the show or what was the occasion when you finally, it hit you that you had arrived?
You think there is a moment when you start, and then you get to thinking, well, if I don't hurry up, they're going to use all the notes that there are. And I said, by the time I get there, they'll all be gone. And I realized very shortly that there is no end. The more you find, the more there is to find. Don't cut your ears off until your heart hears it. Because there is music all over this planet. And the more there is to hear, the more there is to be part of it. It's it has completed my soul that I'm like Ray Charles. If it wasn't for music, I don't think I would be here or anywhere today without it.
Well, we're glad that you're here. Congratulations on this exhibit and for being a part of the American Banjo Hall of Fame right here in the city.
To be part of it is an honor.
We hope that you've enjoyed these memories of one of the greatest entertainers and musicians of all time, Mr. Roy Clark. It's been our honor and privilege to share these memories with you. And if you are enjoying American Banjo Museum Rewind, along with all of our virtual programming, we'd like to invite you to become part of our family. Please join the American Banjo Museum, or if you can, send in a contribution. We really, really appreciate your support. We really appreciate your belief, and we thank you for tuning in. For now, my name is Johnny Baier. Tune in next Saturday for more virtual from the American Banjo Museum.